History has a curious way of remembering some people and quietly forgetting others. When most of us think about the American Revolution, familiar names come to mind. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams. Their portraits hang in museums. Their faces appear in history books. Their words are quoted in classrooms across America. But here's a question. What if some of the most important heroes of the Revolution were never placed in the spotlight? What if the survival of a new nation depended on people whose names were almost forgotten? Today, we're going to meet some of those remarkable women. Women whose courage, intelligence, and determination helped shape the United States. Some fought with words. Some fought with sacrifice. Others risked everything without expecting recognition. Their stories deserve to be remembered. And once you hear them, you may never look at American history the same way again. Let's begin with one extraordinary woman. Her name was Abigail Adams. Many people know her simply as the wife of John Adams, America's second president. But that description barely scratches the surface. Abigail Adams was one of the sharpest minds of her generation. While her husband spent months away helping build a new government, Abigail remained at home in Massachusetts. Life there was anything but peaceful. Disease spread through nearby communities. Food was often scarce. Money was uncertain. The future of the colonies was far from guaranteed. Every sunrise brought new challenges. Yet Abigail never complained. She managed the family farm. She supervised workers. She raised her children. She handled the family's finances. And somehow, she still found time to write thoughtful letters to her husband. Those letters were far more than family updates. They contained ideas, questions, warnings, and advice. John Adams trusted her judgment. In many ways, their letters became private conversations about the future of a nation. Then came one unforgettable moment. It was the spring of 1776. The colonies were preparing to declare independence. New laws would soon shape a new country. Abigail realized something important. If this new nation truly believed in liberty, shouldn't that liberty include women? So she wrote a sentence that would echo through history. Remember the ladies. For simple words. Yet they carried extraordinary meaning. She warned her husband that if women were ignored, if all power remained in the hands of men, future generations would pay the price. For the 18th century, those were remarkably bold words. Abigail wasn't asking for attention. She wasn't seeking fame. She simply believed that justice should belong to everyone. That quiet courage makes her story so remarkable. Now imagine something for a moment. Picture a candle burning late into the evening. Outside, the wind rattles the windows of a small farmhouse. Inside, Abigail sits at a wooden table. A feather quill rests in her hand. Every word she writes could shape tomorrow. She has no guarantee that her husband will even agree with her. Still, she writes. History often celebrates those who stand on battlefields. But sometimes, the greatest courage is found in a quiet room, with nothing more than conviction and a pen. That lesson still speaks to us today. Real leadership isn't always loud. It doesn't always wear a uniform. Sometimes, it quietly carries responsibility when no one else is watching. Abigail Adams showed us that strength and wisdom often walk hand in hand. But she wasn't the only woman whose words changed history. Not far away, another remarkable woman was preparing to fight the revolution in an entirely different way. She carried no rifle. She commanded no army. Yet her writing became one of the most powerful weapons of the entire revolution. And in our next chapter, you'll discover why even America's greatest leaders admired her remarkable courage. Imagine living in a world where your voice was expected to remain silent, where speaking your mind could damage your reputation, or even place your family in danger. Most people would have stayed quiet. But Mercy Otis Warren was not like most people. She believed that ideas could be just as powerful as weapons. and she was determined to prove it. Mercy grew up in Massachusetts in a family that valued education. At a time when many girls received little formal schooling, she listened closely as her brothers studied history, politics, and philosophy. She learned simply by paying attention. Over the years, her love of reading became a love of writing. But these were not ordinary stories. She wrote plays and political essays that challenged British rule. Her words exposed corruption. They questioned unfair laws. And they encouraged ordinary Americans to believe that freedom was worth fighting for. Many of her writings were published anonymously. People often assumed they had been written by a man. In those days, few believed a woman could produce such thoughtful political work. The truth surprised many readers. Among those who admired her was John Adams. He praised her remarkable talent and respected the clarity of her thinking. That was no small compliment. John Adams was one of the most educated men in America. Yet he recognized that Mercy Otis Warren possessed a brilliant political mind. Think about that for a moment. She never commanded an army. She never signed the Declaration of Independence. Yet her ideas helped shape the thinking of a generation. Sometimes, history is changed by people who never step onto a battlefield. Sometimes, it is changed by someone sitting quietly at a desk, writing words that inspire others to act. Years after the revolution ended, Mercy accomplished something even more remarkable. She became one of the first people to write a complete history of the American Revolution. She understood something important. If those who lived through history never recorded their experiences, future generations might never know the whole truth. Because of her dedication, we still hear her voice more than 2 centuries later. Her story reminds us that wisdom has lasting power. Long after battles are forgotten, ideas continue to shape the future. But Mercy was not the only extraordinary writer of her time. Another young woman would soon astonish America. Her journey began under heartbreaking circumstances. As a little girl, she was taken from her home in West Africa. She crossed the Atlantic aboard a slave ship. She arrived in Boston frightened, alone, and uncertain about her future. Her name was Phyllis Wheatley. Few people expected anything from her. But hidden inside that frightened child was an extraordinary gift. The family who purchased Phyllis recognized her intelligence. They taught her to read. To everyone's amazement, she learned with incredible speed. Within only a few years, she was reading some of the greatest writers in the English language. Soon she began writing poetry of her own. Her words were graceful, thoughtful, and deeply moving. People throughout the colonies were astonished. Many simply refused to believe that an enslaved young woman could have written such beautiful poetry. She was even forced to defend her own authorship before respected leaders in Boston. Imagine how difficult that must have been, standing before powerful men, knowing they doubted your abilities before you even spoke. Yet Phyllis remained calm. Her talent spoke for itself. Eventually, her poems reached one of the most important men in America, George Washington. He admired her work so much that he invited her to visit his headquarters. Think about the meaning of that moment. A young woman who had arrived in chains was now being welcomed by the commander of the Continental Army because of her remarkable mind. What an extraordinary journey. Phyllis Wheatley reminds us that greatness is never limited by where someone begins. Talent can appear in the most unexpected places, and courage often grows strongest during life's greatest hardships. Her story still inspires people today because it teaches a lesson that never grows old. Never underestimate the potential hidden inside another human being. You never know whose words, whose kindness, or whose courage might one day change history. But while Mercy Otis Warren and Phyllis Wheatley inspire the nation with their ideas, other women were preparing for a very different battle. There were hungry soldiers to feed, families to protect, supplies to gather, and impossible sacrifices waiting just ahead. In the next chapter, you'll meet the ordinary women whose extraordinary actions kept the American Revolution alive when hope was beginning to fade. Wars are not won by soldiers alone. Behind every battlefield, there are people whose names rarely appear in history books. Someone must grow the food. Someone must make the clothing. Someone must care for the wounded. Someone must keep hope alive. During the American Revolution, that responsibility often fell upon women. Many husbands were away for months. Some were gone for years. Many never came home. Yet life did not stop. Fields still needed to be planted. Children still needed to be raised. Animals still needed to be fed. Every day brought another challenge. Still, they carried on. One of those remarkable women was Mary Draper. When news spread that hungry American soldiers were nearby, Mary didn't wait to be asked for help. She went straight to work. She gathered flour. She lit the oven. Hour after hour, she baked bread for exhausted soldiers who had little left to eat. Imagine the scene. The smell of fresh bread filling a small farmhouse. Outside, the sounds of war growing closer. Inside, a woman working through the night because she knew someone else's son was hungry. Then came another problem. The army was running dangerously low on ammunition. Without bullets, there could be no defense. Mary looked around her home. She saw something precious. Her family's pewter dishes. They were valuable. Some had been passed down through generations. Many people would have protected those heirlooms. Mary made a different choice. She melted them down. The metal was turned into musket balls for American soldiers. Think about that for a moment. She gave up treasured family possessions, not because anyone forced her, but because she believed freedom was worth the sacrifice. That is courage. Not the kind that appears in dramatic paintings, but the quiet courage that asks, what can I give to help others? That question has shaped history more times than we can count. But the women of the Revolution were not only generous. Sometimes they were fearless. One remarkable story comes from Boston. It involves something surprisingly ordinary. Coffee. Today, we hardly think about buying coffee. But during the Revolution, many everyday goods became scarce. Prices climbed higher and higher. Some merchants saw an opportunity. Instead of helping their neighbors, they began hoarding supplies to make more money. One merchant became especially unpopular. People believed he was hiding coffee while families struggled to find enough for their homes. The women of Boston had seen enough. One morning, a determined group marched together through the streets. These were not soldiers. They were wives, mothers, grandmothers, neighbors, well-dressed, well-spoken, and absolutely determined. They confronted the merchant. They demanded fairness. By the end of the day, the hidden coffee was released. The message was clear. During difficult times, a community survives when people care for one another, not when greed comes first. That lesson still feels meaningful today. Years later, another crisis threatened the revolution. By 1780, General Washington's army was exhausted. Many soldiers had worn-out uniforms. Some had little more than rags to protect them from winter. Others lacked blankets. Many had almost nothing. News of their suffering reached Philadelphia. Two remarkable women decided they could not simply watch from a distance. Their names were Esther de Burtreed and Sarah Back. Sarah happened to be Benjamin Franklin's daughter, but she wanted to earn respect through her own actions. Together, these women launched one of the largest volunteer efforts of the entire revolution. They visited homes throughout Philadelphia. They knocked on doors. They asked families to give whatever they could. Some donated coins. Others donated cloth. Everyone contributed according to their ability. Little by little, the effort grew. Soon, they had raised an extraordinary amount of money. But they didn't stop there. The women gathered together. Day after day, they sat beside windows filled with sunlight, or candles glowing late into the night. Needles moved carefully through heavy cloth. Hands became sore. Eyes grew tired. Still, they continued sewing. More than 2,000 shirts were completed for American soldiers. Each shirt represented far more than fabric. It carried a message. Someone believes in you. Someone is praying for your safe return. Someone has not forgotten your sacrifice. Imagine receiving one of those shirts. Far from home. Cold. Hungry. Uncertain whether tomorrow would come. Then realizing a woman you had never met had spent hours making something just for you. Sometimes, hope arrives in the simplest gifts. A warm meal. A handwritten letter. A freshly sewn shirt. Those acts of kindness often become the strength that carries people through life's hardest seasons. The women of the Revolution understood that better than anyone. Their work rarely made headlines. No crowds gathered to cheer them. No statues were built in their honor. Yet without their determination, many historians believe the Continental Army might never have survived its darkest days. But while these women supported the revolution from home, others chose an even more dangerous path. Some disguised themselves as soldiers. Some crossed enemy lines. Some risked execution if they were discovered. Their bravery seems almost unbelievable. And yet, every word of it is true. In the final chapter, you'll meet the women who stepped directly into danger, and whose courage changed the course of American history forever. By now, you've probably noticed something remarkable. The women we've met were not seeking fame. They weren't trying to become famous names in history books. They simply saw a problem and chose to help. But for a few extraordinary women, helping meant risking everything. One of those women was Deborah Sampson. She grew up in difficult circumstances. Her family struggled to survive. From an early age, she learned that life often demanded courage. When the Revolutionary War began, Deborah wanted to serve her country, but there was one problem. Women were not allowed to enlist in the Continental Army. For many people, that would have been the end of the story. Not for Deborah. She quietly cut her hair. She dressed in a soldier's uniform, and she enlisted under the name Robert Shirtleff. Imagine how frightening that must have been. Every conversation, every inspection, every battle carried the risk of discovery. If her secret was revealed, everything would be over. Yet she continued serving beside the other soldiers. She marched for miles. She slept outdoors. She endured hunger, cold, exhaustion, and the constant danger of battle. During one fight, she was wounded. A musket ball became lodged in her leg. Afraid that doctors would discover her identity, she treated the wound herself. Think about the determination that required. Most people would have surrendered. Deborah refused. She continued serving until the war was nearly over. Years later, her remarkable story finally became known. Today, she is remembered as one of America's first female soldiers. Her courage reminds us that determination often begins with a single decision. The decision to step forward, even when others say you cannot. But Deborah was not the only woman risking her life. Another remarkable story takes us to Philadelphia. A quiet woman named Lydia Dara lived in a home that British officers often used for meetings. They believed she posed no threat. After all, she was only a housewife. At least, that's what they thought. One evening, British officers gathered behind closed doors. They discussed plans for a surprise attack against George Washington's army. Lydia listened carefully. She understood the danger immediately. If no warning reached the American forces, many soldiers could lose their lives. The next morning, she asked permission to leave her home to buy flour. The officers agreed. Instead, she quietly made her way toward the American lines. She found an officer and shared everything she had heard. When British troops arrived expecting to surprise Washington, they discovered something unexpected. The American army was already prepared. The attack had failed before it even began. One woman's courage had changed the outcome. History rarely celebrates moments like these. Yet sometimes, the bravest actions happen without applause. Our final story belongs to a young woman named Dicey Langston. She lived on the American frontier. Life there was already dangerous. One night, she learned that a loyalist group planned to attack her brother's camp before sunrise. There was no time to waste. The only hope was to deliver a warning. Between Dicey and the camp stood the Tiger River. It was dark. The water was cold. The current was fast. Most people would have waited until morning. She stepped into the river. The water rose higher and higher. Soon, it reached her shoulders, then her neck. Every step became more difficult. One mistake could have carried her downstream, but she kept moving. She reached the opposite bank. She hurried through the darkness, and she delivered the warning just in time. The soldiers were ready. The surprise attack failed. How many lives were saved that night? No one knows for certain. But because of one young woman's courage, many families were spared unimaginable grief. As we look back on these stories, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. History is not built by famous names alone. It is built by ordinary people who choose courage when no one is watching. Abigail Adams reminded a nation to think about justice. Mercy Otis Warren inspired Americans with powerful ideas. Phyllis Wheatley proved that brilliance cannot be chained. Mary Draper gave up treasured possessions so others could fight. Esther Reed and Sarah Back reminded weary soldiers they were not forgotten. Deborah Sampson marched into battle despite overwhelming obstacles. Lydia Darrah risked everything to protect her country. Dicey Langston crossed a dangerous river because other lives mattered more than her own safety. Different women. Different stories. One remarkable lesson. Greatness is not measured by wealth. It is not measured by titles. And it is not measured by fame. True greatness is measured by character, by sacrifice, by choosing to do what is right, even when no one may ever know your name. Perhaps that is why these stories still touch our hearts today. They remind us that every generation has quiet heroes, people who care for their families, neighbors who help during difficult times, teachers who inspire young minds, nurses who comfort strangers, volunteers who ask for nothing in return. They may never appear in history books, but they leave the world better than they found it. And maybe that is the greatest legacy any of us could hope to leave. Thank you for spending these moments with me. I hope these remarkable women have inspired you as much as they have inspired generations before us. If you enjoy discovering the forgotten stories that shaped our world, I warmly invite you to join our Aging Wisely family by subscribing. Each week, we explore history, life lessons, and timeless wisdom that continues to guide us today. Until next time, take good care of yourself. Keep learning. Keep sharing your wisdom. And always remember, history is filled with extraordinary people whose names the world almost forgot.